Welcome to the Nature Backed podcast, a talk show where we discuss the green future of our planet. My name is Tarmo Virki, and my guest today is Larry Selzer from the Conservation Fund. The episode was recorded live at Forward's Global Climate Community Platform, celebrating the launch of Climate Media Collective. Enjoy the show. Hi, Larry. Welcome to first ever Nature Backed on this new platform. It has the first starting challenges, like with all technologies. The not the most commonly used platform as what I have at least come across. My name is Tarmo Virki. I've been doing this Nature Backed podcast now for more than 2 years. Hello, everyone else who are online. Larry, to start off, tell us a few words. What is the Conservation Fund?
Well, first of all, Tarmo, thank you for having me on. It's wonderful to have this conversation with you. The Conservation Fund, of which I am honored to be the president and CEO, is one of the top environmental organizations in the country. We're a nonprofit. We operate across all 50 states, but just domestically in the United States. And interestingly, we have a unique charter that encompasses both conservation and economic development. And working at that interface of business and the environment, trying to balance economic return and environmental protection is where we like to play.
And that's a really interesting domain, this interaction between the business and conservation, because there is so much, there are so much NGOs who are trying to protect nature with their life. And in the world, there are still way too many companies where nature is not on their agenda at all. How do you manage to combine those two things?
Well, it's not an easy endeavor because there's a long history, over a century, of keeping these two powerful forces, the environmental movement and the free enterprise system, separate in the United States. And our mission is to bring them together to create a mighty river of action. If you go back to the beginning of the environmental movement in this country, which is around the turn of the 20th century when President Roosevelt was in office, conservation was about protecting land from people, setting aside vast tracts of land to remove any economic opportunity from that landscape. As we go forward, I think we need to bring economic and environmental objectives together, not just protecting land from people, but frankly, protecting land for people. Rural communities especially are dependent on these landscapes for their livelihoods, for their quality of life. And we must figure out ways that they can achieve economic vitality, or they will not support the conservation of the critical natural, historic, and cultural resources.
Absolutely. Though I have to say that to me, this Roosevelt's idea of protecting land from people almost makes sense these days, because what has happened over the last 40, 50 years is something which kind of underlines his original mission. Would you disagree?
Well, think about it this way. Back at the turn of the 20th century, there were no protected lands. There were no laws and regulation, and the economic sector was damaging the landscape at a massive scale. Forests were cut down to build cities, and mines were opened across all of the most critical landscapes to generate income for people, mostly in the urban coasts. Species were hunted for fashion and for sport almost to extinction, and that was what prompted Roosevelt to put in place the National Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and to dramatically expand the National Park Service, essentially setting aside some of the most important landscapes in the country. That all changed after World War II, when the country began industrializing rapidly, and we faced a new set of challenges, mostly pollution from growing economies and big industry. And that unleashed a tidal wave of grassroots activism. Rachel Carson really was the spearhead for that when she published a book that for the first time linked human health and pollution. And since then, we have placed more than 50,000 pieces of environmental legislation on the federal, state, and local books. And frankly, it has done a remarkable job. We have reduced pollution. We have set aside critical lands. We have reduced sport hunting to a regulated and manageable level. And for 50, 60, almost 70 years, that framework governed the environmental movement in the United States. But today we face a whole new set of challenges. The loss of biodiversity due to the loss of habitat primarily, but also the need to transition from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy. All of this is going to stress the environment in new and unique ways. Think about this. Transitioning to clean energy is going to require us to build up to 1 million miles of new transmission lines, nearly 100,000 miles of new pipelines to capture carbon dioxide and bring it to underground storage sites. We're going to need to open new mines for critical minerals so that we can electrify transportation and industry and housing. All of this is going to have a massive impact on land. It will impact millions and millions of acres of land, and yet we need to set aside millions of acres of land if we're to stem the loss of biodiversity, which is accelerating in this country and across the globe. To me, those things need to be brought together. The build out of the clean energy economy and the protection of habitat for species.
Your organization, a fund, how do you exactly do it from your side?
On the land conservation side, we act on behalf of public agencies at the federal, state, and local level. They know what lands they want to protect, but they're usually ill-prepared to move quickly enough to meet the needs of sellers of land. They often don't have their financing ready when landowners are ready to sell. And the Conservation Fund steps into that space, negotiating directly with landowners, acquiring land, financing the transactions, and then holding that land until the public agencies, could be a national park, a state wildlife area, a city park, until they have their money ready and they're ready to buy that land back from us. So on the land conservation side, it's a very well-oiled machine. We're a very sophisticated real estate operation. We've closed more than 4,000 transactions over the last 4 decades, almost 10 million acres of land valued at more than $10 billion.
Hi, it's me, Flo, the annoying clairvoyant from Ghost Hampton, the podcast. We had the time of our lives, or in my case, death, giving all our listeners the willies this summer. You missed Ghost Hampton? No, we can't allow that. Now, all episodes of Ghost Hampton are running on Electricast Media everywhere for free. Ghost Hampton, go there to be frightened, stay there to laugh. Electricast.
Life is hard, but finding a really great podcast makes the days go by so much easier. Hi, my name is Blue Telusma. I'm a writer, an emotional intelligence coach, and the host of Humanize with Blue Telusma, a podcast where we believe that when you humanize everyone in the room, a great conversation is almost guaranteed. Join us every week here on Electricast as me and my guest co-hosts unpack big topics and interview even bigger personalities with a sense of humor and a dash of mischief. If you're looking for a new best friend in your head, we've got you covered. Electricast.
Quite a statistic. And in addition to this land swap, land owner management, what else do you do?
Well, as I mentioned at the outset, our charter is both for land conservation and for economic development. And we are keenly focused on how you can use land without degrading it to stimulate sustainable economic activity. That's how rural communities can not just survive, but thrive. Think about forests in this country. We're losing about 1 million acres of forest a year across the United States. We've lost 90 million acres in the last 30 years. These forests are essential to the future of this country. Not only do they provide us with clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, opportunities for recreation, They also support more than 2 million jobs, and these are jobs that can't be exported overseas. And increasingly, they are sinks for carbon, part of our global climate emissions. And yet we're losing this base at an alarming rate. The Conservation Fund built an entire business unit around buying and managing sustainably these large, intact, working forests to protect clean air and clean water, habitat for species, jobs, and opportunities to address climate change. It's a very sophisticated real estate operation, as I mentioned. And in this case, we have acquired more than 1 million acres of working forest. We had to build an operating company to manage these forests. Even as a nonprofit, we are supporting the jobs and the tax base in rural America.
The 90 million hectares of lost forest, that sounds horribly a lot. And this is just a US number. You know, I'm sure in Europe we will have similar or bigger numbers. So with the 1 million hectares now in kind of your company managing, what's your take on the carbon credit market? Are you creating credits out of this and financing with those credits the new forests, or?
Yeah, a great question. Just to be clear, it's in this country we talk about acres, not hectares, and there's quite a difference. But look, forests are the most effective carbon sinks, land-based carbon sinks that we have in the world. And we need to protect and maintain, if not increase, the standing stock of forests across the globe. In the United States, the carbon market, there is a regulated compliance market originating out of California. And then there's the burgeoning voluntary market that is applicable anywhere else in the country. The compliance market works very well. The California market is well regulated and well established with strong transparency and credibility. The voluntary market has a long way to go until we reach a state where we have the type of transparency and credibility that we need to mobilize a lot of capital. Having said all that, carbon offsets are an incredibly important part of reaching net zero, not just for companies, but for governments as well. And so we're very bullish on the development of the carbon offset market. We are participating in it. We're trying to bring rationality, credibility, transparency to this market. And I think eventually it will clear and be an effective mechanism.
Mm-hmm. You said that on the voluntary side, there is still a long way to go. Do you have any kind of views on how long is the way to go before it reaches the kind of enough of trustability or stability of the, I don't know, other commodity financial instruments markets, or how to kind of define that long way?
Well, for many years, we didn't have any regulation. There were no rules of the road. There were no guideposts, if you will. And so it was a free-for-all. And in that type of a situation, bad actors are allowed to proliferate and do things that otherwise would not be allowed on a more regulated framework. I think we're rapidly now moving into a scenario where we have strong criteria that are being established across multiple fronts. We have governments involved trying to make sure that companies, when they make claims about their net zero pledges and their carbon accounting, can be held to account for those claims. All of this is evolving very rapidly, and I'm very confident that within the next couple of years, we're going to have a strong and credible market.
As we are recording this live, audience, please be free to use the chat window to ask the questions yourself. That makes the most use of actually having a live. On the bottom of the screen, there is the box to add questions through the chat to Larry and the Conservation Fund, because I think the stuff you guys are doing is horribly important for the climate. How much do you have international interactions? Are there similar organizations like yours in other countries? Or do you have the, international network of the conservation funds?
Certainly we have challenges all across the globe, but the Conservation Fund is focused just in the United States. That doesn't mean we don't work with partners who have international operations, and we share best practices and we share learnings so that everybody can get better at what they're doing. But our work is really focused on the 50 United States.
How much the I don't know, daily U.S. politics having an effect on you? I'm not asking about the elections in a few weeks, but in general, the kind of changing winds on the kind of Capitol Hill or in the U.S., how much they're having an impact on you?
It's a wonderful question, and I'll answer it through a couple of different data points. First of all, conservation is a core value for the American people. As one example, every year, every election cycle, there are ballot measures to support conservation. Some of these are bond issues. Some of them are to establish a lottery or a real estate transfer tax, depending on the state. Of all of the ballot measures proposed over the last 30 years in red states and blue states, 75% of all proposed ballot measures have passed. That shows you that the American people care deeply about conservation and are willing to open their pocketbooks to pay for these natural, cultural, and historic resources to be protected. Now, of course, when we have economic distress in the country, it's harder to generate the money to support conservation. And certainly when you have elections at the federal level, ideology comes into play. Some administrations are more bullish on conservation than others. But the beauty of the Conservation Fund is that working at the interface of business and environment, trying to balance economic return and environmental protection, means we are addressing all of the spectrum of needs that communities have. They want clean water, they want clean air, they want good solid jobs, they want a tax base, they want recreation, they want species protected. All of these things, these public interest values, get rolled up into our work. And so we enjoy very strong support, irrespective of elections and irrespective of economics, although certainly there are high points and low points.
Of course, always. It seems to me that your philosophy would be very similar to the Northern Europe, where kind of combining the two, the nature and the business growth and the society welfare is very much together on the agenda.
I think it's not dissimilar. Certainly between the European systems and relationships and the United States systems and relationships, there are fundamental differences. My understanding in Europe is that industry and government work much closer together to develop policy and to implement actions that benefit both economic and environmental objectives. In the United States, it's set up fundamentally as an adversarial system where industry and government lock horns and try and wrestle each other to the ground. There are times when we collaborate. The Inflation Reduction Act was a marvelous example of industry and government working together to address climate change, to stimulate economic development through the build out of energy transition infrastructure. But it's a different system. Now, we may share the same goals and objectives. We may care about communities and natural resources the same way. But operating in the United States has to be done in a slightly different fashion than outside.
Absolutely. If you look, in your diary into the 2025, what are the big things you guys want to reach?
Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier that we had passed a milestone of protecting 1 million acres of intact working forests in the United States. We've done an assessment all across the country, and our target is to protect 5 million acres. That's 10% of the existing privately held forest land in the United States. And these lands have been deemed as conservation, critically important lands for conservation. Interestingly, they can be harvested in a sustainable fashion. They can remain on the tax rolls. They can remain as part of the economic system in rural communities. They just have to be protected from subdivision, from conversion out of forestry. So we've set aspirational goals around the forest sector. We also have set aspirational goals around habitat. In this country, the current administration has set a target of protecting 30% of our land by 2030. Now, that's an awfully ambitious timetable, but protecting 30% of our land is about protecting biodiversity, the species that we need to survive and have a quality of life in this country. The Conservation Fund has protected 10 million acres, and we aim to increase that dramatically to help reach this 30% target in the next couple of decades.
2030, you said, so that's only, 6 years? Was it 2050?
2030 was the initial target. Yeah, the program was called 30 by 30. And obviously, that's a very ambitious target. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, under the old Roosevelt model, where you had to draw lines on a map and buy land that would be owned and managed by a government agency, it's very hard to reach that scale. The Conservation Fund is focused very well on not buying land and placing it in government ownership, but buying what's called a conservation easement on large agricultural and forested landscapes, allowing the land to remain in private ownership, where the economic activity is intact, the tax base is intact, but we're purchasing the development rights so that land, if it's a farm, will always stay a farm. It's a forest, will always stay a forest. And that way we can get to very significant scale at an increasing rate over the next couple of years.
Sounds like you will have your hands full with reaching those targets. I mean, the 30% habitat protection country-wise is massive. I mean, I assume some European countries might have similar targets, but they sound so. Probably the solution is, somebody's doing the, Excel sheet calculations to reach this, but it's crazy.
Well, it's certainly a very bold aspirational goal, but I think setting bold aspirational goals motivates people. It certainly motivates Americans. There's an old expression that Americans always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And in this case, we've tried a lot of things, and I think our particular brand of conservation, balancing economic and environmental objectives, allowing land to stay in private ownership and maintain the economic vitality of that land, I think that's the future. And I think that Americans increasingly will embrace this model, this brand of conservation, and will allow us to scale dramatically.
Good stuff. Thanks, Larry, for this discussion. For all the other people who are not on this call, this episode will be on Nature-backed podcast in coming weeks. I don't have exact date yet to announce, but during October. So make sure you go and download Nature-backed to your podcast player so you will not miss this episode. And thanks again, Larry, for this discussion.
Well, Tarmo, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to visit with you, and I hope this gets people thinking about the future of conservation in America and all of the things that conservation can do. It can protect habitat, jobs, economic vitality, cultural and historic resources. It is the future.
Absolutely, and not only America, around the world.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.
Hi, I'm Geraldine Glass, and I'm excited to share a new healing music offering, an extended version song called Joy Reboot, a unique fusion of pop, classic, rap, soundscapes, and funk to inspire collaboration and bring unity through sound. For us, Joy Reboot is music medicine, out now with Electrocast Records.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs Exposed, where we dive into the stories of visionary entrepreneurs revolutionizing the workforce. Our ongoing mission is to showcase founders and creators doing amazing things in business and beyond. If you're a founder, CEO, tech enthusiast, or someone generally interested in startup land, join me, Adam Levinter, as I dive into what makes an entrepreneur an entrepreneur. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Electrocast. Futurecast.